Okay, shall we start? Good morning. I will switch to Arabic first, and then I will go back to English, okay? Just for the translators to be ready.
أعد المترجمون. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, our dear students and our followers on the social media, may the blessings of God be upon you all, and welcome to the fifth strategic conference organized by the Strategic Studies Unit titled Defense Strategy for Small States and Smaller Forces, Tactical Adaptations and Operational Innovations. 36 experts and practitioners from 28 countries will be participating in this conference over a period of 3 days and discussing 30 cases of small and smaller states and sub-state forces. We have a distinguished group of experts in the various fields of defense who will be lucky over the next 3 days to benefit from their they will be discussing Southeast Asia, the Middle East and the Far East and the other regions in the world. The conference aims to focus on the defense aspects of small and smaller countries and the impact on their security and regional and international security in view of the developments from the South China Sea to Eastern Europe to the Middle East, of course, and the political changes in the United States and especially in its foreign policy. The themes of this conference become more important, and we hope the papers and the presentations will be dealing with the tactical, operational, and strategic aspects in the 7 aspects of war. The interventions and the papers will allude to the agency of small countries. When do they succeed or when do they fail? And I think there is a gap in the current literature, and it will merit more contributions in research in the future. And as we usually do at the Arab Center or the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, we try to bridge the gap between different disciplines and also to close the gaps between theory and practice, and at the same time try and focus on the different levels, whether at the strategic level or the security level. Most of the participants are either field specialists or experts. They are both military and civilian, and they have many contributions when it comes to policies, and we do not want to separate ourselves from reality as it happens. The aim of this conference is in threefold. First, it provides multi-level analysis and also to provide comparisons of smaller states, states and smaller states, and how to deal with the challenges faced by small states and smaller states, and how they face up to the challenges of limited resources or fragile alliances, and also tactical innovations and economic resources, limited manpower. We will also try and provide a framework or a structure to benefit strategic and defense policies to enhance the security of smaller states. Following the conference, selected papers may be published as strategic papers by the Strategic Studies Unit of the Arab Center and or on the website of the Arab Center, and under different titles. All of these outcomes are to provide some references to help smaller countries in their defense strategies and security studies, and of course, war and peace studies and peace through deterrence in specifically. I don't want to take too much of your time, but it's my pleasure to announce that the first session will be chaired by Professor Abdul Wahab Al Affendi, Dr. Abdul Wahab Al Affendi. He is also Deputy Dean for Academic Affairs and formerly was the Dean of the Social Studies and the Director of the Political Affairs Programs and the founder of Islam and Democracy at Westminster University, and he was a coordinator for that program until 2015, and he held many diplomatic, media, and research positions in the United States. And he has many publications to his name pertaining to political Islam, and he has genocidal narratives from published by Bloomsbury in 2015, and he's an associate editor of Post-Arab Revolutions and Democratization. دكتور عبد الوهاب الافندي يعطيك الكلمة.
Dear Omar,
عمر, I'm no longer director of the political programs, so that Dr. Ammar, the current director, will not be upset. It's my pleasure to chair this session, and I'm sure it will be a very rich session with great contributions. The first speaker will be Dr. Anthony King, who is a professor of anthropology and war studies. You chose the right combination, and it's from Exeter University. He was advisor to the British Armed Forces, and he has many contributions, transformation of the armed forces from Iraq to Afghanistan, combat soldier, infantry tactics and cohesion in 20th century, from 21st century, Oxford University, and Command 21st Century General. Other publications also, but we don't have time to go through them. Dr. King will be talking about small states in modern wars, the roles of urban warfare and artificial intelligence in strategic defense.
uh, while they're preparing the while they're preparing the presentation, I just want to put a question about the whole thing. Taking
So we've got a little bit of a, that's great.
We had a small tech glitch, so we will need the assistance for the flashpoint, for the PowerPoints. But for now, Anthony is going to go ahead, and I will try to fix it from here. Yeah. Please.
Thanks a lot. Mike, okay. So in our discussions before this talk on deterrence and defense in small states, Omar and myself were talking, and given my recent history in terms of work, the initial suggestion was to write about, to talk about urban warfare and AI in terms of small state defense. And in the course of developing this lecture, Omar and I decided to just drop out the urban warfare element. So what I'd like to talk for about 30 minutes about is the issue of artificial intelligence and small state deterrence, small state defense. Now, presumably due to my own incompetence, I had a PowerPoint. It wasn't a very good PowerPoint, but I had a PowerPoint which has disappeared into cyberspace. It's no problem. So what I'd like to just talk through is a number of issues in terms of artificial intelligence and small state defense to emphasize and to repeat. Now, let me just make one kind of admission here. I mean, I've looked at the program of people speaking. You know, there's people who have actually been involved in small state defense over the last 3 to 4 years, and who are equally better qualified than me, and I'm looking forward to hearing their comments. But let me make a few comments about artificial intelligence and the issue of warfare, and especially small state defense. Artificial intelligence, the artificial intelligence revolution. In 2004, Ray Kurzweil, a very well-known futurologist, but also an expert in certain technologies, including AI, wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. And in that book, he argued that humanity was on the edge of a profound technological... Can anyone else hear, or just me? Yeah. A profound technological transformation, namely, humanity was going to be transformed by artificial intelligence. And we were going to become millions of times more intelligent as a result of harnessing the power of AI. At the time, the book seemed preemptive, perhaps to many somewhat absurd, 2004. Move forward a decade later into 2014, 2016 period, and his predictions did not seem so absurd. Famously, in 2016, the DeepMind team based in UK but had been bought by Google created a program. Is that one? Great. Can you hear me? For playing Go. And in 2016, that program, AlphaGo, against all predictions, defeated the world champion Lee Sedol. Even more interestingly, In game 3, it made a move that nobody in the programming team had predicted. It put one of the counters on the edge of the board. And one of the commentators said, it's not a human move. What did this suggest? It suggested that we were in the domain where artificial intelligence was not just compatible with human intelligence, but could be superior to human intelligence. In the last decade, those transformations have increased with the major innovations in terms of artificial intelligence programs, second-generation artificial intelligence programs, discovering within 18 months a problem that biologists had been working on for decades, namely the structure of the human protein. Alpha protein fold, alpha fold, again, DeepMind, discovered the structure of this protein in 18 months. We seem to be on the edge of a remarkable revolution. Large language models released 2022, 2023, ChatGPT-3, ChatGPT-4, Google Bard, etc., seem to demonstrate this progress even more, where these programs trained on perhaps 10% of all human writing, all human material that's been produced since the beginning of history, so trained on an absolutely vast quantity of material, have proved to be extraordinarily capable. Google Bard last year, somewhat controversially whether it's true, but Google Bard trained itself to translate Bengali, apparently with no direction from human programmers. So we seem to be on the cusp of an AI revolution. To quote Ray Kurzweil's phrase, the singularity seems to be nearer. Within the next decade, we seem to be in a revolutionary phase, which is utterly unique in terms of human history. The question for us is, what does this mean for warfare? And for this audience, what does the development, the rapid development of artificial intelligence mean for small state deterrence and defense? Is it going to be more difficult to deter and defend as a small state? Or is it going to actually be easier with the harnessing of AI? Now, this is the question I'd like to look at over the next 20 minutes. First point here. If we look at the literature, there is a great deal of either utopianism or dystopianism about the application of AI to warfare. 2023 and then 2024, Geoffrey Hinton, the very famous computer scientist who was instrumental to developing neural networks in the 1980s and has been a key figure in the development of artificial intelligence, gave an interview to the New York Times in May 2023, where he argued essentially that AI was a totally unique form of intelligence and one which threatened to potentially destroy everyone, that malign actors would potentially use AI to develop killer robots and would put humanity at threat. We could dismiss Geoffrey Hinton as a non-security study specialist. That would be a totally appropriate thing to do and argue that somehow his statements were hyperbolic. However, if we look at the security studies literature, at security studies scholars, actually their argument is very similar. So Henry Kissinger's almost his very last public statement, The Age of AI, his book that he wrote with Eric Schmidt and Daniel Huttenlocher, argued basically the same, that AI represented a fundamental transformation in strategy and in warfare. Why? Because AI introduced a new form of intelligence into strategy and warfare in which humans would be displaced and war itself would be automated. Now, Kissinger, I think, needs to be taken seriously. You know, he died a year or so ago. But his statement is confirmed by many other scholars. So British scholar and colleague of mine, Kenneth Payne, for the last 10 years has been talking about the way that AI is going to transform warfare. Denise Garcia, John Williams, various other scholars have been arguing along a similar line. We, according to this argument, are in the age of robot wars. AI, artificial intelligence and its programs are going to be so sophisticated that they are going to actually automate war in two ways. One, they're going to take over, AI agents will take over strategic decision-making because trained on vast quantities of data which humans could never begin to ingest, they will offer faster, better, more accurate decision-making at the strategic level. Secondly, the development, the flourishing of AI will lead to the promulgation and the proliferation of autonomous weapon systems on the battlefield. And the vision is that the battlefield itself will become automated, directed at the top level by an AI agent and coordinated and conducted at the tactical level on the battlefield and in the battle space by autonomous weapons, aerial drones, maritime drones, robots on the ground. This is the vision. Is this a remotely accurate vision of warfare which small states should take into account? Well, what I want to argue for the next 15 minutes is no. This vision is not an accurate vision of warfare under AI. Warfare under AI will take a slightly different form, and small states need to be aware of the character of an AI-enabled military operation, AI-enabled military campaign, and they need to be aware of how AI might enable them to deter and defend their states. But it's not a vision of robot wars, of automation, of killer robots, etc., and supercomputers. It's a quite different vision, more mundane in many ways, but more complex and more threatening in other ways. Now, why won't AI automate war? Because the character of contemporary AI means that the possibility of it colonizing the whole process of war is completely unfeasible. So second generation AI, developed from the 20th century, 21st century, especially from 2012, is based on three things. It is based on data, it's based on algorithms and neural networks, and it's based on large computing power. What does second generation AI do? Why has it been so successful? Because it has such vast quantities of data, because it has such a massive computing power to process that data, second generation AI has been able to identify statistical correlations in the data to a level that are basically correct and accurate. So second generation AI is based on an inductive system of probabilistic calculation. It knows nothing about the world. All second generation AI does is to calculate correlations in the data between data point A and data point B. That's all it sees. Because it iterates that correlation 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, 10 million times, it essentially finds correlations which are accurate in the real world. But AI doesn't know anything. Second generation AI knows nothing about the real world. All it knows is probabilistic calculations of correlation in data. Unbelievably powerful. When you've got enough data, unbelievably powerful. To emphasize, to repeat, it has discovered things that humans could never see. The structure of human proteins, because it can see parameters and correlations in the data that human scientists never could. But is war reducible to probabilistic induction? No, I put it to you. War is a human interactive affair in which commanders have to do more than just rate the statistical probability between data points. It is a political enterprise in which violence is enacted for political gains. And therefore, a commander needs to understand the situation, connect political guidance to military activity, to understand the political significance of military actions, to negotiate with allies, to inspire and negotiate with subordinates and with political leaders. And a commander needs to imagine the future which they are trying to develop. None of this is reducible to AI. Now, let me just give you an example of this. In 2020, there were some very famous US Air Force trials, the so-called Alpha Dog trials, where a human pilot was put against an AI program. The AI program won every single time. 5 out of 5, the AI program won. Result, large numbers of commentators said, we are seconds away from AI agents taking over aircraft and every other weapon system and fighting better than humans. Not true. The Alpha Dog trial was virtual. It was just a computer simulation. All of the complexities of warfare, weather, mission change, enemy action, coordinating with colleagues, mechanical breakdown, difficult conditions in other ways. These were excluded from the trial. The trial was not used by the US Air Force to automate combat aircraft. It was an exploration of how AI might enable certain subsystems within US aircraft to support human actors. My point is this: AI will not take over warfare. It will not automate warfare. What we are seeing over the last decade, and in fact with accelerating force in the last few years, is AI being harnessed by military powers to augment the capacity of its generals and the capacity of its combatants. Now, so AI will not automate war, but it is absolutely vital for military operations. It's become absolutely vital for military operations. What has AI done? It has processed data at a massive scale, at a scale that no human and no human team could ever do. See the protein, AlphaFold, the discovery of protein. Same applies to military operations. If we have the right data and we program and train the programs properly, AI will process data in a way humans cannot. It won't automate war. What will it do? It will aid, and it already has aided, 3 functions. And these are 3 critical functions which every state, especially small states, need to recognize. AI, as a data processing program, will do 3 things. Firstly, it will help and has helped militaries to plan. It has helped militaries to process data at scale to be able to plan faster, better, and more quickly. Let me give you one tiny example of this. In the UK, there is a small project called the Enhanced Command and Control Spearhead. It has automated, through training an AI agent, one aspect of the planning process: route planning. It has essentially created a program that allows a military headquarters to automate the process of route planning. And route planning, for those of you who've been in the military, is a very complicated, boring, laborious task which staff officers plot the routes through various areas. They plot the gradient of the route, where the enemy can see over the route. The British Army have developed, it's a very simple program. It just automates this process. It effectively is like Google Maps for the military. They put the destination they start, the destination they finish, and the program generates it. We can see across countries, across Western countries, we can see it in Ukraine, militaries automating subsections of the planning process, which is amenable to data processing, to automate subparts of the planning process. So AI helps planning. Second point, AI has helped, maybe even in certain circumstances, has transformed targeting. So AI is able to take all of the data from satellite imagery, all of the data, geostrategic data, all of the open source data, all of the infiltrated, hacked phone messaging data to generate targeting to a depth, a scale, an accuracy that I think is new. It is unprecedented. And we can see clear examples of this. For instance, in May the 1st, 2022, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the defense staff in Russia, was reportedly wounded in a strike, probably a HIMARS strike, just north of Izium. It subsequently emerged that that strike was significantly, the Ukrainian forces were significantly helped by US forces based in Germany in developing that strike. Essentially, an AI machine learning program was employed to sift and trawl through vast quantities of data to identify Russian command posts at that period in the war, and to do so successfully. We've seen a repeat of this in Gaza with the use of lavender and gospel by the IDF. Processing large quantities, vast quantities of data, it is possible for militaries to target to a depth and speed which they've not done before. Final function, cyber operations. AI can help, indeed is essential to certain forms of cyber operations, cyber attack, cyber defense, and information operations. And we can see the application of artificial intelligence very strongly to certain cyber operations, including in Ukraine. So AI will not automate warfare, but any military which wants to compete in the contemporary environment will want to, perhaps need to harness the power of data and AI to augment these three functions: planning, targeting, cyber operations. And any military that doesn't harness and exploit the power of data processed by AI is likely to significantly disadvantage itself. So for a small state, the harnessing of these capabilities, I would put it to you, is very important. Now, here we come to the last point I want to make. How are states going to do this? They can't do it on their own. Even the richest states, and the largest world military powers, China, the US, do not have the defense budgets to be able to do this independently and alone. What are they doing? They are increasingly forming an alliance with major private tech companies and with the tech sector as a whole to help them to do it. The tech sector has three critical things that military forces need. They often have the data, or some of the data that military forces need, which is augmented by states' own intelligence. They have the computing power, absolutely vital, and they have the human expertise. Brilliant graduates don't want to go and work for the Pentagon or the Ministry of Defense. They want to work for Amazon Web Services, for Google, for these absolutely top-end, cutting-edge tech companies. Those companies have the talent that is required to develop the programs to harness AI. So what do we see over the last 10 years? The emergence of a military tech complex, a close partnership between the tech sector and the military sector. And this isn't the same as the military-industrial complex of the 20th century. In the 20th century, industrial manufacturers, arms manufacturers, made platforms and weapons on the basis of specifications given to them by the Ministry of Defense. That is not the case for the tech companies. In order to apply AI and to make it operational, the tech sector, the tech companies need to be working with the militaries, with the actual operational militaries, to develop and refine algorithms, programs, in order to harness the power of data. So what we see is not just a strategic alliance with the tech sector of the type that we saw in the 20th century. We don't even see privatization of the type we've seen since 1990. What we are seeing is the emergence of an actual engaged partnership between private tech companies and between operational militaries on operations. It's really a novel organizational complex, which in many ways takes militaries back to a previous period of history, early modern period, where militaries and private companies operated together to deliver state effects. Now, this is a possibility. The possibility of tech military alliance is possible. It also has massive risks. 2002, September 2022, Elon Musk had been providing large amounts of Starlink satellites to Ukraine. He was worried about the start of what he called World War III. And therefore, in September 2022, in response to the potential of a Ukrainian attack on Sevastopol, he turned off Starlink and stopped them from mounting those attacks with the use of Starlink. We see a politicization, maybe a militarization of the military sector, of actual military operations. Let me come to a conclusion. So let me conclude. What do I think the implications are? For small states, the harnessing of AI will be essential. It will help them to plan. It will help them to target. It will help them to do cyber operations. But they have to also recognize their disadvantage in relation to countries like US and China, which have large indigenous tech sector. Second point, is this going to make war easier, simpler, less brutal, less bloody? Is it going to make deterrence and defense less difficult, less traumatic? No. There's an irony here. The data that moves along cyber optic cables or moves about in cyberspace, in Wi-Fi cyberspace, moves at the speed of light. But if we look at wars over the last 5 years, the trend is completely to the opposite way, towards attrition, brutal forms of military action. And that's the prediction I would make to you, that small states, if they're going to protect themselves, are going to need to recognize that AI will not make war lightning quick. It will actually slow war down and make it more brutal. But here's the thing. If, as a small state, you can persuade an enemy that that is the reality, it may be possible to deter them, therefore. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. That was an interesting topic for discussion. We now move to ننتقل الآن إلى الدكتور
Dr. Omar Ashour, and Dr. Omar Ashour is a professor at the Doha Institute, and he is the head of the Strategic Studies Unit at the Arab Center. He specializes in reciprocal warfare and many other things. He has many books to his name on jihadis and ISIS and the military tactics they used in Iraq, Egypt, and also And now he works on a project on small states defense, and he will be presenting on hybrid defense for smaller states, lessons in combat effectiveness from Ukraine to Gaza. I'll ask him later, is Ukraine a small country or is Gaza a state? But I'll leave that to the very end. And thank you very much, Dr. Abdul Wahab. I will say a few words until we sort out this technical problem. Is Ukraine a small country? I'll come to this later. The Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. They have enormous resources, but they found themselves fighting as a small state because of the enemy they had to face. Gaza is not a state until now, but the next session will be on the Palestinian resistance as a nucleus for a small state army. So I'm not going to use the PowerPoint. We still have a problem. The lecture will be in English وباختصار أقول أود أن أعتذر للبروفيسور كينغ لهذه المشكلة الفنية وأن أشكره على عرضه القيم. وقد سجلت بعض الملاحظات لدي بما في ذلك من جهة أن الذكاء الاصطناعي لديه أثر ما نراه في أوكرانيا.
In the Black Sea, we'll talk a little bit about it. It forced the relocation of the Russian Black Sea Fleet with a country that has a very tiny naval force. The naval force was taken in 2014. But at the same time, it is replacing artillery. That's on one end, but not in terms of the numbers of casualties, it's very effective. But at the same time, you're absolutely right in all the other aspects, because in a way, most of these artificial intelligence autonomous systems are not really that autonomous, right? It's always, there's a human in the loop, almost always, or a human on the loop. And some of them are very manpower intensive. So you have I was doing a comparison between operating one drone unit in Ukraine and operating one T-72 tank crew. You know, you need 3 for the T-72, and you need about 4: a pilot, a co-pilot, a munitions officer, and a logistician for the drone. And if it breaks down, you know, a human has to go and get it in the way. Well, sometimes drones, but operated by humans, needs to go and fix the glitch. But fascinating, and I'm sorry we did not show the PowerPoint, because really there was some fascinating comparisons, especially when it comes to the civilian tech industry budgets compared to the defense budgets. And Amazon's, Google, their budget in terms of investments in IT technology and other forms of technology is just massive compared to the ministries of defense. So it will give a perspective. It puts the whole idea of military-industrial complex to almost non-existent at the moment. So Eisenhower was when he declared the military-industrial complex, was talking about a very different era. And then finally, on detection-destruction cycle. The detection-destruction cycle, because of AI and other technology, is very fast. So the time between detecting the position of the enemy and destroying it is becoming very, very fast. The only thing is that precision is not necessarily enhanced, because you can, what we saw in Gaza and in Ukraine, the decision, the destruction after detection is quite fast, but it's not precise. Which is, again, we go back to, you know, almost area field artillery. You know. So I'm going to talk very briefly about basically hybrid defense for smaller states, lessons in combat effectiveness from Ukraine and Gaza. And the way I'm going to go through it is just to talk a little bit about small states and smaller forces as a backgrounder, and also we'll deal with the issues of definitions that Dr. Abdul Wahab has just highlighted, and build on a few previous findings that we, based on previous research I had, and then define the concepts of what is hybrid defense really, and what is combat effectiveness and military effectiveness for that matters. And then extract some lessons from Ukraine and Gaza. I'm not necessarily going to focus on the 2 case studies, but I will extract lessons from these 2 case studies. So I'm not going to go through quite a few details, but just to say briefly that this is a part of a larger project. So it's a 4-fold project. The first part of it is extracting lessons. And it's an article that is forthcoming with the Arab Center's Siyasat Arabiya, and then followed by 3 other articles coming in different English. So Siyasat Arabiya is in Arabic, but the other 3 will be in English language. Okay, so just in terms of the what are we talking about? So we're talking about mainly small state defense policies, and we're trying to define or gather the literature definitions of small states. So if you can classify them, the ones who define small state quantitative measures, as in population, geography, GDP, and the ones who instilled qualitative measures for that definition, such as previous combat performance, strategic and social economic resilience, diplomatic leverages, geostrategic locations, and so on. So this would be, the old work of, on the quantitative side, David Vital and Braston in 1973, but also on the qualitative side, you will have Handel in 1981, and Ed Storm, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, also later on in 2018. And then you will have the ones who give a mixed ranking. So you will, on one end, you will have the ranking of the first ranked, second ranked, third ranked in terms of the small states. The first rank would be the small states will be in the third rank. The first rank will be the major powers that will be able to defend themselves against any other threats. The second rank, so this will be the US and China. The second rank will be the powers that will be able to defend themselves against the first rank, which will be countries like the UK and France. And then the third rank will be the small states who cannot defend themselves against first and second, and cannot lead as well military operations. So that was one way to define it, to mix the qualitative and the quantitative dimensions. Now, the most important bit here, I think we will probably focus on it a bit during the conference, is that small is relative, so hence smaller. Why smaller relative? Because you can be the largest country in Europe, like Ukraine, with major resources, and then you will find yourself having all the structural problems of the small state. Meaning that if you're fighting the Russian Federation, is that the country is 28 times the size in terms of the geography, 4 or 5 times in terms of population, and by the figures of 2022, about 4 or 5 times in terms of the active military personnel. So then you become the smaller side, even though by absolute matters, you're big. Okay, so the defense strategies, very briefly, you will find the framing in the literature under 4 categories. First one is the forming an alliance. So as a small state, you want to defend yourself by joining a larger alliance, preferably NATO. 32 countries, 3 nuclear powers may defend you if you're under attack. Or you can join smaller alliances, the 6 members of the GCC countries, for example, or the 6 members of the CSTO, the Russian-led collective security organization. So that's one form. Alliances, join the alliance, get protected. The other form is the famous, not being a formal member of the alliance, but having what you can call a tripwire force. So have a strong country presence with a small unit, and a small unit is debatable. Charles de Gaulle, I think, once said, when he was asked about the tripwire force, the size of the tripwire force for American troops to be staged, and he said just 1 American soldier will be enough, but he needs to be killed. Because if he's killed, then the follow-on force will arrive. So the tripwire force, small size forward unit, that will signal strategic willingness of the smaller power, the larger state, to defend the smaller one. And then the 2 other defense strategies, heavy investments in the conventional force and in the reserve force, and we see this. We will talk about the whole defense. We have here papers about Singapore, and also we'll talk about Israel in the next session. And then you will have also investment in the reserve and the resistance, meaning the conventional force is there, but also there's further investment in this idea of empowering the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure, and preparing for an actual invasion to resist as a force from within, as opposed to stopping it from without. And we'll explore this idea a bit later. So these are mainly the framings. The last 2, the resistance and the conventional, for smaller state, these are the least explored in the literature, because the most of the literature has focuses on has a focus on the alliance formation, joining the alliance, and on the tripwire forces. All of them are strategies to be discussed and debated during the next 2 to 3 days. Okay, so this is briefly on the framing. Then briefly on the previous findings. So I wrote a book, Dr. Abdulwahab mentioned, on how ISIS fights. And here was a tiny force, outnumbered in every fight, outgunned in every fight, all domains, all 7 domains. No local, hated by everybody, really hated by everybody locally, no, limited support. No state sponsorship, so it's not like Hezbollah on one end or the Contras in Nicaragua on the other end, where you get a full state sponsorship, so nothing like that. But also not necessarily fighting in very complex geographies, mostly deserts. Later on in Africa there was a complex geography in the jungles, but mostly flatlands in the deserts, but then created its own geography to fight in. So that idea of raiding the city, but before, so the modus of operandi was as such, and was repeated multiple times. You infiltrate and destabilize, meaning you enter the city, you map out who's with who, the ones who can be flipped, can be bribed, or can be inspired. The ones who will create obstacles can be assassinated. You can do kidnappings and so on. So destabilize enough and then secure the victory, secure the city by a conventional force. Conventional here is basically a hybrid force. It's mostly technicals and heavy machine guns. So you enter and you secure after destabilization. The other way it used to fight it is to raid and then fortify and then occupy. So once you enter the city, you create your own geography, you raid it quite quickly. Mosul was the famous example from 5th of June to the 10th of June. You raid, and then you fortify the city. You create your own geography favorable for your combat performance, and then you occupy. And why you occupy? To extract resources, to extract as much resources as possible, and then after that, use these resources to fund your combat and guerrilla units. And it did this it was, I have here on the slide, agency on steroids. So it was almost independent and almost uncontrollable in many ways, and playing its own game. And because of its extreme ideology and lack of friends, lack of allies, lack of state sponsorship, all of the above, uncompromising and so on, it collapsed. But the techniques, the tactics, and the procedures, and the experiences live on, because they're not ideological. You can use the same tactics and techniques and procedures multiple times. The whole idea of challenging the US air supremacy, that was not, I think the US did not have an attack on its forces since, from the air since April 1953 until 2016, when ISIS actually changed that. So under the US air superiority, it attacked with about 70 drones in Mosul under 3,000 feet. So it created a subdomain, if you wish. So it was these ideas that we talk about today with whether self-detonating robots. They had SVIBITs, suicide vehicle-borne IEDs, with armored vehicles. Some of them were armored, some of them had multiple functions. The ideas of linking the air and land battle in a way between the drones and the suicide bomber that was going on in Mosul. And all these ideas were in the very prototypes. They did not have electronic warfare assets to protect their drones, so it was easy for the US to deal with this at a later stage. So they could not adapt as fast, but they innovated, and the innovations lived on after them. So this is just briefly. Then I'll move quickly to one clear operation, which is in terms of the hybrid, that took many of these TTPs and applied them. If you want one of the most successful hybrid operations in history, it's the Russian occupation and the annexation of Crimea in February and March 2014. Basically, it cost the Russians 1 militiaman in terms of casualties, and they got the most important geostrategic peninsula of Ukraine back then, and almost got away with it. It was an infiltration operation. There was the psychological warfare, false front organizations, infiltrations of the security and the military establishment at a very high level, created enough destabilization. And then after that, securing by a conventional force, which was an amphibious landing and also an air assault, plus the troops that were already existed in Crimea, which were in the range of 20,000. So destabilize and then secure by the conventional force, because then the conventional force will not need to fight. And it was quite successful, but these TTPs again were noted. It was difficult to repeat, so the success was was quite clear in Crimea, but it was not the same in the Donbass or in Kharkiv, where you had attempts as well. Okay, so if we got that in 2014, between 2014 and 2022, Ukraine had to adopt what I call here a hybrid defense strategy. So what is a hybrid defense strategy? Basically, the definition is it's a defensive strategy that embraces the combined employment of techniques, tactics, and procedures of both hard and sharp power. In four, I'm classifying the domains differently from the Pentagon, so the Pentagon classifies it at five domains because they don't separate the cyber, the information, and the electronic. I try to separate them. So in four or more domains of operations, usually with the aim of enhancing the combat or the military effectiveness of the disadvantaged force during a defensive or a counteroffensive infokinetic maneuver. And by infokinetic meaning that the information is there, but also the all other conventional elements is there as well. So again, the psychological operations and the information operations destabilize enough, and then you move your forces, whether land, air, or naval or air assault, to secure that. to secure your objective. Hybrid offense will have too many details, including, and most importantly, the weaponization of civilian resources and the weaponization of the civilian infrastructure. And we'll see that quite clear in areas like Mariupol, for example, in Kyiv Oblast, and also in Gaza. So you create your own favorable environment to be able to fight effectively in it. But also include the alliances, what I call the horizontal escalation capabilities by non-state forces. So you have your own alliances with non-state forces to be able to stretch the adversary. And it also its maximum impact, and this is back to Anthony's latest book on urban warfare. Its maximum impact is in the urban areas. Why the urban areas? Because it needs population, it needs connectivity, and it needs educated personnel who are savvy with technology. And you can find these more in cities than in towns, and more in towns than in villages and less developed areas. Okay. And very briefly, my main question is how hybrid defense, if you used hybrid defense, such as in Gaza, such as in Ukraine, how would that affect your combat effectiveness? That's the overarching research question, but then it has a few more details in terms of the cases. I separate also very briefly between combat effectiveness and military effectiveness. Combat effectiveness here, we're talking about tactical level battles, and it's a measure to measure the performance of the force on a battle level, and then military effectiveness more on the strategic level, meaning the outcome of the war.
2 minutes, Omar.
2 minutes. Okay. I will save you the details on the cases, and I will jump very quickly to the lessons. So the first lessons extracted from Gaza and Ukraine is for the smaller states, is the investment in reserves. Reserves are the seeds of your resilience. Investments in them in terms of quantity and quality, because it will boost your manpower. It will make sure that many of the disadvantages that you will have facing the larger states will be mitigated in a way. The second one is mobilize smartly. In terms of the mobilization, I want to get into two details, but you will find, for example, what the Ukrainians have done is to be able to mobilize civilians to do military tasks without being soldiers. So that includes military analysis, and therefore the soldiers who will do the military analysis, for example, in the intelligence, would go to the front or would go to the training or would do soldier tasks as opposed to analysis. But there's too many examples under this idea of mobilize smartly. 3, enable the infrastructure. The civilian infrastructure, I think the Qassam Brigade in Gaza did a very sophisticated and effective complex infrastructure, ranging not just from urban foxholes to dedicated killing fields to interlocking fields of fire to holes in the buildings for the rocket artillery. Basically, they recreated defensive lines, urban defensive lines, to allow a strategy of hybrid defense in depth in Ukraine. Plus, of course, I'm not even mentioning the tunnels, which we will explore in details in the next session on Palestine and Gaza. Okay. 4, there is no, embrace multi-domain and combined arms, because there is no way except to fight on multi-domain, including the information domain and the electronic and the cyber, to fight effectively and to enhance the effectiveness. 5, one lesson learned is remote warfare is there to stay. So strike beyond sight, and remote warfare investment in it is worth it. I think Professor King has elaborated on that. So I'll save you the details and you can read it in the paper. And then the 6 is on the non-state alliances. They are operationally effective. Both the Ukrainians and the Gazans and Palestinians in Gaza had a series of non-state alliances across the globe, really. And they were operationally effective sometimes in terms of stretching the adversary, but strategically there are quite a few issues there, and also I'll save you the details. But their impacts are more so far. You can conclusively say that operationally they have an impact, strategically they may have an adversarial impact. And finally, spend for effectiveness, not prestige, which means tailoring the budgets, the defense budgets, on what you can use and what your system allows you to use in terms of the training, the familiarity of the soldiers and so on, as opposed to the new novelties. And also this is interlinked with what Professor King has mentioned regarding the impact of AI and its impact on small states. Okay, so I'm going to stop here now, and I will leave the rest for Professor Abdul Wahab and for the rest of the speakers, and I look forward to our discussions in the next few days, and also to fixing that tech glitch, which I profusely apologize for. Thank you very much.
Amen. شكرا لكم. Thank you very much, Omar. We open now the floor for questions. Microphone, please.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
شكرا على هذه العرض. أنا من أذر.
Professor King, you talked about how AI technologies will make great powers even stronger, and small states are not going to reach their capabilities in terms of AI and its role in military. Do you think that is going to make small states even smaller, even bigger in terms of their defense, and how it is going to affect the balance between small states and great powers? My second question is going to Dr. Omar. You talked about the technologies, how they are being used in conflict situations. My question is from another perspective. How can new emerging technologies be used for conflict prevention? Do they have any role to be used to prevent conflicts, primarily between small states? Thank you.
Thank you. I have first to congratulate the presentation, was very interesting, but I have a question for Professor King. I was asking if all the IA that you present modify or have some effect in the defense policy of UK.
Okay, here.
Thank you very much for presentations. I would like to ask a question about the Professor King's presentation. My question is about the civil-military relations. So we usually say that the war is a mean of politics. So we cannot detach from politics from war. So when you say the AI is helping planning the military strategy, we should recognize that at some part the AI should be involved in planning the foreign policy or national defense security. So is it possible to separate the military strategy and foreign policies, which is planned by AI? So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Lay it down there. Over at the boy, yeah, at the end. It's okay. Get to.
أمل السبيعي معهد الدوحة.
أمل السبيعي, the Institute. Thank you for the presenters. Before asking, we have seen in the recent years how the cyber strength is used along with the traditional and electronic war, and how it has an impact on many domains or fields, and it also impacted some of the small states like Israel and Ukraine, and how does it also impact the security policies? Qatar is a small country, but it faced a threat and it faced a crisis that could have transformed into a war. This brings me to the second question. To what extent Qatar put the cyber security as a priority in its security strategy, especially after 2017 and its impact on the national security? Peace be upon you. راشد المهندي. لدي سؤال للبروفيسور كينغ والدكتور عمر. بالرغم من أنني أتفق مع تقييمك لاستخدام الذكاء الاصطناعي في الحرب، وما رأيك حول الطريقة التي يمكن بها للذكاء الاصطناعي أن يخفض من إمكان اندلاع أزمات أو حروب؟
So you mentioned technicals as a conventional force. Do you think we're seeing a trend where traditionally unconventional capabilities would be categorized as conventional? It's just a thought. Thank you.
Sabah khair, my question to King. On the one hand, we have this artificial intelligence as an emerging force in terms of warfare and international relations. On the other hand, states have now several options in terms of how to solidify their either hard power, soft power, smart power, sticky powers, and so forth. So my question is specific about what does AI add to the concept of smart power?
I think we don't have questions from the floor. أنا هأنهي.
First of all, the definition of the small country. These are important questions. In the second subject, which is differentiating between the strength non-state actors and the countries or states, it seems that in addition to the confusion in the classification of those categories, there is also a problematic in the Arab world about Israel. Between these two aspects, it is clear that the problem in the war against Israel is that all the countries around Israel, for some reason after the defeats and the inequality, it became clear that they cannot fight Israel. And since 65, the OLP, but since that time, the resistance movements tried to be a country, and the OLP or the PLO tried to have Jordan as a country, and Hezbollah almost made of Lebanon his country or their country. So we say the same thing about Hamas. So if there is a problem for states or countries who have the vulnerability, these countries, the problem is not only in their military, as it is happening in Lebanon now, in the state and Iraq also, when there were the war against Kuwait, or the United States for Kuwait, the state was destroyed, and all its infrastructure was destroyed. So the problem is protect the state. So it was supposed that the actors, non-government or like Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., they are protecting the country from being so weak and unable to, so that if they do something, the country is not considered as responsible for their actions. So Hamas tried to have Gaza as a state, and Hezbollah tried to have Lebanon as their country. So the resistance, it should not be a country, and some even are saying that for the PLO, it needs, but in fact Hanoi used Vietcong as to hide behind it, and also the Houthis in Yemen. So if there is a war, it would be easy to destroy them. But if the country is destroyed, all is finished. So how is it possible for the resistance, for example, in Algiers, that it is not country, but it could be out of the country, and it's not hiding behind the country?
Thanks. Does that work?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thanks very much for the questions, which are challenging for sure. Let me just go through them and try and answer them fairly briefly. I mean, I think they're a great starting point to have a longer discussion during the course of the next 3 days, which I'd welcome from the people asking me questions. So the first one is AI going to make small states weaker? In the strategic sense, yeah, I think it will. But that doesn't mean in this particular case it makes them weaker. I think that if a country, a smaller state, develops an AI deterrent strategy, it could become quite totally adequate. And we could think of the examples of Ukraine's incredible rapidity in which they developed their Delta planning system, a digitalized planning system. They'd had an artillery system within weeks of the war starting, because they've got such a vibrant tech sector with the young people there. They developed AI-enabled systems very quickly. So, and one could replicate, what do we think? Singapore, Taiwan, I think, have similar educated young people heavily involved in the digital economy. So strategically, overall, yes. Globally, yes. In particular cases, no. Second point, UK defence policy. UK defence policy on AI is to harness the power of AI and data. Automation, robotics is in the document, but the primary things are intelligence, planning, cyber, whereas the UK, a long way behind the US, suffering as a smaller state, all of the disadvantages with a small defence budget, an underdeveloped tech sector and a tech relationship with military. So, and that would be, I would say that, and UK is good in terms of Europe, so that would stand for Europe, so it's a great question. Civil military, let's talk more. You could see from my talk, I think everyone with AI talks about automation, about the actual technology, the programs, the coding, the neural networks. For us, or for me as a social scientist and anthropologist, the key thing is civil military relations, the political implications, and I think they're profound. I actually think that in terms of that link between strategy and planning, the AI contribution is so small, it will not obliterate and needs to worry us. What needs to worry us is things like Musk who is profoundly altering who is in the strategy making community. Cyber, great question. Cyber is a really important dimension of war. It is not war, but it is an important dimension of war, amplifying it. It is part of diplomacy, it's part of international relations. I will answer it from my own perspective. Artificial intelligence becomes critical. Cyber has 3 areas: espionage, sabotage, subversion, and AI helps on all of those, and any state needs to be harnessing the power of AI to stop it being hacked, to stop it being spied on, to stop it being subverted. So, great question. The engagement question, this is really strong in the literature, especially in the Anglophone literature. The fear is AI doesn't care about you and I. If we get killed, the AI agent doesn't care. So therefore, because it's not bearing any risks, the threshold of combat will be lower. I just don't agree with that vision. If we look at the actual application of AI by militaries and states, it just isn't, it's just not automating decision-making at that strategic and operational level, which lowers the engagement level. The example I think is relevant is the use of lavender. So people have said, oh, well, lavender, the Israeli automated AI system for targeting, caused the strikes in Gaza. I disagree. Why the strikes, there were more strikes, was because the Israelis changed their civilian death, collateral damage calculation, because they were fighting a different kind of war than all the previous interventions. So the decision-making was here in the cabinet, in Netanyahu's cabinet and the IDF. It was not in the lavender system. The lavender system was just producing targets. So for me, it's a brilliant question. I don't see that as an issue. I don't see AI operating as an issue. Smart power, I don't use the term smart power. But smart power, I would say, is a state using AI and data for its policies generally, and I'm interested in defense policy. So maybe I'm interested in smart powers in defense and warfighting. But it's not a phrase I use, so maybe we can talk afterwards. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. Fascinating. I think Tony has done a great job in answering most of the questions, so I'm just going to briefly comment and perhaps engage with one or two. So for Azerbaijan, I think first you guys did a very good job in terms of future peace through deterrence mainly. The AI technology was probably in 2020 was at a different level during the combat operations in Karabakh. I saw one of the videos. So when I talked briefly about infokinetic maneuver, this is an infokinetic maneuver. So the video of the drones going into the tunnels to attack and destroy Armenian soldiers, while the Bayraktar is above. So it was a Harok too that went in, and a Bayraktar is filming the drone. So the suicide drone is being filmed by the Bayraktar, and then immediately going into these cyberspace, into the internet basically, so that other Armenian soldiers would see what's happening and therefore refuse to go to the front because they know that the drone will come into the tunnel and destroy them. So you're doing two bits. You're actually doing the attrition on the front, but also you're preventing mobilization for an assistance force to come and so this is how you interlink it in terms of information and kinetics. And then I saw another thing, which again, I'm not sure this was there a human in the loop or was the human out of the loop? Because the one of the videos, also issued by the Azerbaijanis, you would see, I think it was a Harop 2, it did the dive. So now it's 7 seconds before it hits the target. So it did the dive, but then you see in the camera, it was a camouflaged T-72, buried, almost buried. So actually it doesn't matter because, because of the thermals, it can see it even if it's buried. So it did the dive, and then it saw a Panzer, an air defense, mobile air defense system coming. So rather than doing the dive here, it went like this and attacked the Panzer. So it attacked the more dangerous target and left the buried target. And my big question, for whoever is commanding this, was this an AI selection? Because this will make a big difference. Or was there a human in the loop that made this decision, even though there was only 7 seconds left for the explosion? It was human, yeah, human in the loop. Okay. So if we upgrade it for what Tony is talking about, then it will be a different level of precision. It will be a different level of precision if it's just AI, The other this is for deterrence is significant in terms of preventing future, because in a way when you show your capabilities and combat tested capabilities, then usually the adversary will think twice before invading or attacking, because then it will be a long war, and nobody likes long wars, democracy or dictatorship. No one likes long wars. In terms of I think the sharp power, so Tony has already mentioned in terms of the cyber capabilities, you can use it defensively or you can use it as a tool of sharp power. Sharp power meaning you use the tools of soft power, but just to destabilize the targeted state. So, the media, the information, even the diplomacy, some of the cyber tools to basically disrupt and destabilize the other side. So you can use this, or cyber tools can be a tool in terms of destabilizing the targeted side. Okay, hybrid and conventional. So the technicals, just for those who don't know what's a technical, it's basically a pickup truck, and you mount on it either a heavy machine gun or sometimes an anti-aircraft autocannon like a ZU-23 or something of that, ZU-23 or something of that sort. So why is it a hybrid or a conventional? It is a hybrid. It's for sure hybrid. And IS fought as a hybrid source, as a hybrid force, and it sourced this by mobilizing and recruiting and radicalizing civilians, but also had many ex-military folks who also joined it. So it was par excellence a hybrid force. But then it used its hybrid force as a conventional force. So when the technicals rolled in, soft-skin technicals, they didn't even armor them. When they rolled in Mosul specifically, Ramadi, they needed more complex force, and in Fallujah it was an alliance with other militias. But when they rolled in Mosul specifically, it was like a conventional force. They knew exactly where to go, where to secure, where to target, where to release the prisoners. So they acted as if they are a motorized infantry battalion-sized formation. So yeah. About the small states and the non-state forces. So the small states, Holland and Israel, I gave the review. So quantitatively, yes, they're small states in terms of population. I think it was under 15 million. It was said by Vital in 1967, I think. Or under 10 million maybe, and then it was upgraded to 15 million. So if you want to take the absolute measures, if you want to take the relational measures, they're also in relations to others. There are smaller states, and also we're talking here about smaller forces as well. So in terms of the smaller forces, Israel would be the big side in Gaza because it had the much bigger force, and the Palestinian resistance was the smaller side and the smaller force in that case. But when faced in 1967 with Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, it was the small state and the smaller force. Okay. The issue with Israel combat performances is not fighting a state or a non-state. That's more of my argument, like a hypothesis. It's not. the examples that you mentioned in the Viet Cong and the Algerians, the FLN. So the Viet Cong, you had the largest offensive, the Tet Offensive, 84,000, almost an 8-division strong attack. Hybrid force, the North Vietnamese were there and the Viet Cong were there, attacking about 34 cities and towns, centers, and they did not secure one. And it ended up being a military failure, destruction of the Viet Cong capabilities, a military victory for the US, and a disaster in terms of politics. It just showed, so I think Lyndon Johnson was going crazy because the media was showing the bodies of the Viet Cong in the embassy, in the American embassy, and he was saying, here, the bodies, they attacked us, they're dead. And, but here's the information space. The information space was saying, they reached the embassy, so you're not winning this fight. And here's when you do the famous Max Boot 3 Ps, propaganda affects the public opinion affects politics, politics here means decision making. So you had this round going on. The media, the information dimension affected the public opinion. This is mainly in democracies. And the public opinion affected the politics. So despite being militarily win, it did not matter. Same thing for the FLN in Algeria. Actually, in the late part of the Algerian War of Independence, they were losing militarily, but they were winning politically. The same, we can go through the battles and we can check who was doing what back then. So it's not about the non-state force. It's about how you fight, really. And the Israelis have been investing in their capabilities since 1947 onwards. And I think we'll talk a bit more, Dr. Mahmoud Muharib will talk a bit more about the capabilities in the next session. But in a way, it was a different strategic defense. They did not suffer from many of what the Arab states and Arab regimes specifically had suffered from within their armed forces. And a final bit, it's not non-state forces do not always win. Actually, the trajectory is different now because there are more wins by non-state forces, most recently in Syria, winning against a state force, but it's not always like that. It's a break in historical patterns that started in probably the mid-70s onwards, mainly because the non-state forces was able to break the monopoly on the means of violence by the state, but they are copying in many ways from the state. They're taking technologies and tactics and techniques and procedures employed by the state. And the final bit also is, because you mentioned, I think somebody mentioned Chechnya. We could not cover it. We had a speaker, but unfortunately he could not come. But in Chechnya, in August 1996, it was in a way, an unstate force or a de facto small state fighting the Russian Federation. And the way there was, they were also in trouble militarily because they're fighting the stronger side. But they just chose the right timing to infiltrate the capital and then take POWs, over 10,000 POWs. And this is where the negotiations started. So again, you're losing militarily, but then this was a strategic strike or a strategic operation that altered the war outcome to the favor of the smaller and the weaker side. So you see, it's not a pattern, but it's more of a complicated picture in that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar and Dr. Anthony. Thank you for attending this. I think we'll have a next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much.